I'd like to welcome everybody to the May 14, 2014 Legal and Finance Committee for the City of Rapid City. Our first order of business is the roll call and the termination of a quorum. Here. Thank you. Next order of business is the adoption of the agenda. Does anybody have any additions or deletions from the agenda? Not appearing, I entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now moving on to general public comment. General public comment is a time for members of the public to discuss or express concerns of any item not currently on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any item not on the agenda except for placement on the agenda by the unanimous vote of the council members present. I have no speaker request forms for general public comment. Does anyone wish to speak on anything that's not currently on the agenda? Not appearing. I'm going to move on to consent items numbers 1 through 18. I'm going to open public comment on consent items numbers 1 through 18. I have two request forms, speaker request forms. And if you would please approach the podium. The green light means you have 3 minutes, 30 seconds is the yellow light, and the red light means please, and the red light means please wrap up your comments. And for those of you who have your cell phones, please put them in the vibrate mode. And the first speaker request form tonight is on Jennifer Langwith on item number 16. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to talk for just a second about this recommendation number 4 on item number 16, which is the approval of TIFs for housing development should be contingent on developers assisting in the development of affordable housing for low-income people. This is something that just came to my attention, and as a developer, I do have great concerns about this. We developed an area called the Bellagio, which is an upper-end custom home development on Southwest Rapid City. Originally, that subdivision was approved for sewers. We were encouraged by the city to go ahead and put in information to get a TIF so that sewer lines could be put into that area. What that required us to do was to go on the hook for over $1 million. Before that, septics were approved, which would be paid for at the time construction was done. The TIF was approved, and what that TIF did is it extended sewer from Sheridan Lake Road up past our subdivision, which is on Catron Boulevard, so that the sewer could then continue across the highway and form the loop that the city needed. Now, if this requirement was in place, that's saying that in a subdivision where you've got lot prices that are in that $85,000 to $150,000, we're supposed to set aside property for low-income housing. Our choice, if this would have been in place at that time, is to stay with sewers or septic systems, which the city was trying to eliminate. The way that this is put together is a disincentive to doing development. It is highly expensive, and there's development issues here already. Our cost of developing is very high. And it gets higher and higher every year with all the new requirements. Looking at some of these examples that she put in, or whoever put this together is talking about, they're saying other areas of the country. Well, we have different areas of developing. Once you get into the hills, your development costs are tremendously higher than out in some of the flat areas. What is this going to do to comparables when you have to have low-income housing in here? People won't put the TIFs in, which actually extends the infrastructure for the city and is in many times the right thing to do because the city doesn't go out and put infrastructure in ahead of development. So I've got some huge concerns with this, and discounting a $95,000 lot to $85,000 does not work with low-income housing anyway. So there's just a lot of loopholes in here. This is just, I don't think it's a very good doable item. So I would hope you would take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Langwith. And item number 16, we also have a speaker request form from Mr. Cantag. Sir, if you'd approach the podium, please, and you have 3 minutes. If you identify yourself.
Thank you. I apologize. I did come in a little bit late. I'm Kent Haig from Rapid City. I represent, in this capacity, Haig Development in Rapid City, in the area. like I said, it came in a few minutes late, so I apologize. So if I'm not being just simply redundant here, but as most of you know, that's pretty much what I do well, is be redundant. I'd like to say, or at least have a few of this item 16 pulled off for a little bit more developer input, perhaps. I know it's been continued since April 2nd, but I don't necessarily on its face think it's a bad thing. The community block grants are different than the TIF. So, but my comments are more specific as to the TIF itself and how a TIF structure might work. Before something goes into the guidelines and turns into a hard and fast rule, but not an ordinance, and all those things go down the road, I think it warrants a little bit more input, a little bit more study to come up with something that achieves the city's goal of wanting to address affordable housing, workforce housing, and I think that's excellent policy. However, there are ways it can be done that would more readily achieve that, because you have developers that perhaps aren't bristling at the thought of having to do something, shall be doing something, unless certain issues are present. One would be, is the TIF a city bond-backed TIF, or is it a developer-backed TIF? Something like this seems to make great sense if it's a city-backed bond TIF. And I think there can be and should be certain criteria for certain projects of certain nature. If it's a developer-backed TIF, remember the developer's still on the hook for all that money if this TIF doesn't go. So, and that's, I think, where the public melding into the private aspect needs to be very delicately dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haig. I have no further speaker request forms for any items numbers 1 through 18 on the consent calendar. Does anybody wish to speak on any more of those items? None appearing. I'm going to close public comment on items 1 through 18 and now look to the council for any removal of any of the items. Chair will recognize Alderwoman Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number 16.
Item number 16 is being removed for further consideration. Any other items? I entertain a motion to approve the agenda with exclusive of item number 16. Motion by Peterson, second by Laurenti. For items number 1 through 18, exclusive number 16. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're now on to item number 16, which is approve requested CDBG policy changes for fiscal year 2015, continued from the April 2nd, 2014 Legal and Finance Committee. Chair will recognize Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I found it interesting that this was coming back without any other supporting information. I know that we had quite a few questions on this last time around early April. I did want to touch on a couple of the recommendations. Most of them actually make quite a bit of sense for policy and program changes to our disbursement of these funds and how we're going to go about doing that. I did have a concern on the creation of the investment committee. And if I may direct a question to Ms. Garcia, if I may.
By all means.
Thank you. Talking about, Barb, the composition of this committee, I guess when I read through it, I've been involved in citizen-only committees, and it can be a balancing act of, okay, we're responsible for these dollars, and we're going to continue to be responsible, and then, wow, it's a free-for-all, let's just do whatever, and it's very difficult to kind of build in that checks and balances. So should it all be all citizens? Should there be some public official input? I mean, just to kind of, keep things on the right track. What kind of thought was given before this recommendation was developed is the question.
And Barbara, if you could identify yourself, please, for the record. Thank you.
Barbara Garcia, Community Development. There was some discussion about how that committee should be set up, that it shouldn't be too large, that it becomes unwieldy, like you say, and goes in too many directions. And that it was thought that removing council members from the decision part, as far as going through and analyzing and making the recommendation, to put it in the citizens who deal with it on an everyday basis. And because city council is up for re-election, half of it every year, and that changes the composition, so we're constantly having to re-educate people about what CDBG is, how it can be used, and for that decision-making process. Whereas if we have a set group that deal with it on a daily basis and know the issues of the community better, that the decisions for the recommendations would be better. Those recommendations are just recommendations that then go to council, where you make final decisions on whether you accept those or you want to change them. So you still have the ultimate decision on how the funding goes, but as far as going through 21 or 50 applications and deciding and recommending which of those fits the needs, they felt that maybe it would be better if it were citizens who are involved with homelessness, housing, and some of those issues on a daily basis.
Okay, I can appreciate that. However, I think the one thing that is going to be overlooked is if it's going to be in the council's arena to make the ultimate decision, we're going to need to be educated on it anyway. And I know that as having been involved with that committee for a number of years now, I'm able to talk to my colleagues and let them know some of the things that I've learned over the years. I understand the turnover issue. I don't think we're going to get around that unless the form of government changes or the term lengths get extended. So you're really trying to build that institutional knowledge. Is there a way that, I mean, if this passes right now, I just feel like there are some holes in it. Like, we need to have maybe some council liaisons. We need to have something so that there is that bridge in communication, or you're going to end up not only working with this committee, you're going to end up having to come in and educate council as well. I mean, there's not going to be getting any getting around that. So did you foresee taking this after it passes and actually coming up with some guidelines for this committee, such as how long the process people are going to go to be selected, or is this going to be an internal decision? How is this committee going to come together?
Well, we have had discussions with the attorney's office, and the recommendation from the mayor was that it be set up similar to some of the other committees that are already out there, following their guidelines. And so Allison has been working on a draft for you on, we're waiting for it to be approved, and then she would bring forward a draft. There'd been a recommendation of 5 members with 2 alternates. We had discussed the possibility of liaisons, but part of the mayor's discussion on that was that you guys had so many other committees already, and we're trying to narrow those down. Were we just adding more back on your plate? I have no dog in the fight on how you go with that, whether we have council liaison or not.
So if I'm hearing you, then we'll have opportunities when Allison brings the rest of it forward
Yes.
to make some adjustments to this?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk then about recommendation number 4, since we had some public comment on that today. I think there were some great points brought up, and we weren't privy to what was discussed internally when this came forward as a recommendation. So what this sounds like to me, and it could be just one of those language things. I mean, I was discussing this with Terry the other day, that you could read things multiple ways, so I understand that. But with the approval of TIFs for housing development should be contingent on developers. Was this going to be, or was the intent behind this to be a black and white line in the sand, where I've heard another staff member say, in exchange for, if we're going to do this favor for developers, then we would expect that any development built in with a TIF is going to bring in these requirements?
Number one, it was not meant to be black and white.
Okay.
But a recommendation for you to explore further, because there are hundreds of examples of how a TIF could be used. How you choose to use it would be something we would determine.
So this
Number 2 was, it was never brought up to be in relation to the other part of your question. I actually have a presentation for you. You asked me to bring back, and so I've got a short presentation about TIFs and how they're used, and the land trust. Those were the 2 concerns you had last time. And so I'm prepared to talk about those, give you a little more ideas. The handouts that I gave you are an example of how they are being used in some of these other ways. I was asked to come up with methods for us in our consolidated plan on how to fund some of these projects, how to get more private and public involvement in them. And these are some of those ideas as far as going forward and looking at them. And it is already one of the guidelines is figuring out how TIFs can be used for affordable housing in the city's consolidated plan or comprehensive plan that you just adopted. So these are trying to bring forward some of those ideas for us to explore to hopefully have some use of it. And I think my presentation will give you a little more idea on that.
Okay, well, we didn't have any of that going into today with it being on the agenda, so we kind of feel that we didn't have that background.
Well,
So I
yeah.
guess my next question would be for Joel, Mr. Chair, if I may.
By all means.
Mr. Landine, if this recommendation passes, since this actually did not go through the TIF committee, is my understanding, or that whole process of updating the overall TIF policy, how would we work that? Because what I'm trying to avoid is having it like is concerning me, having it be a black or white thing. Now, if a TIF is an option for developers that want to get into building these types of developments and having a percentage of it be for affordable housing, that's fine. But I don't think it should be I guarantee there's going to be cases, we've already talked about some of these TIFs in the recent past where the city was obliged to put in infrastructure. We didn't have the funding for it. TIF was really the only tool, and it would be, I think, just an insult to put that on the backs of the developers to add this additional requirement and have it be a mandate. So can you address that at all for us?
I'd probably feel more comfortable addressing it on Monday night, looking at this in particular. Since this change is really related or coming to you through the Community Development Block Grant, I don't know that anything you do with this today makes any change to the TIF policy because it hasn't gone through the TIF committee. It hasn't become a formal part of the TIF policy. But at the same time, you don't necessarily want to have conflicting provisions, one in the Community Development Block Grant and one in the TIF guidelines. So maybe it's just a timing issue, and in addition, it sounds like you may want to have some concerns about the substance of the recommendation. I have not really looked at this very closely, so if you want, I could look at it more closely prior to the meeting Monday night and be in a better position to provide you an answer.
Okay, I appreciate that. I will yield for now. Thank you.
Joe? I still have no motion on the floor. Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson.
Thank you. I would like to see Barb Garcia's presentation so we can be better informed by Monday. And
I might recommend that we save it for the entire council on Monday so everybody can watch it.
Barb, will you be able to present it on Monday? A presentation?
I believe so. I don't think I have anything. Yes, I could.
Okay, would that work for?
The other thing I would just suggest my colleagues also is that we could divide part of this up, or we can do it on Monday night also, and send more back so we can get some things going and hold back on some things. So, thanks.
Chair recognizes Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for Barb Garcia, if I
By all
may.
means.
Are there any of these recommendations, Ms. Garcia, that you need some action on immediately of the 6 recommendations?
Not immediately. They can
Okay.
wait, and I'm fine with splitting off some of them. But if you want to wait until Monday night and hear the presentation and separate off TIFs and/or land trusts, that's fine. The others are I don't think anybody really had much discussion about the others. They're just more policies for the RFP that we'll put out. I just need a decision on the RFP no later than July.
Okay. Okay. You know how often couple issues within a bigger context can
Sure.
hold things up. So if we do need to divide them, we're glad to do that. And I guess the question is, do you want to do the presentation twice or just do it Monday for the full council? I think this is a big enough issue with those questions that we should probably do it for the full council as well.
That's fine with me. It's whatever works for you guys.
Okay.
That's fine.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it.
And the chair recognizes Mr. TIF, Steve Laurenti.
I make a motion to move this to council without recommendation. I'd like to maintain the floor, please.
By all means. We have a motion to send to council without recommendation by Laurenti, second by Peterson. Mr. Laurenti, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Barb, as I'm reading through these recommendations, just clarify for me. My assumption at this point is that there isn't anything in these recommendations really that isn't coming back to us in some form or another, when it comes to TIFs, when it comes to the investment committee. All of that is going to come back to us in either a change in an ordinance or the form of a new ordinance that establishes a new committee. Am I correct on that assumption?
That's correct.
Okay,
yes.
very good. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Charity Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just doing this to antagonize you, actually. I remember the conversation in April when we first brought this up, and we were thinking they were just blanket recommendations and they were going to be further explored and it wasn't a big deal. And then it was brought to our attention that if we passed these recommendations, then the TIF policy would change. And that was kind of like, wait, motion was withdrawn. We wanted extra study. So I'm not sure that I agree with that. I think we do need to take the time and the extra caution, have Joel review it and have that discussion Monday. So I hope you understand where some of us are coming from. Thank you.
Certainly.
Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson.
Thank you. I had a question probably for the developers here that spoke earlier. And one of them is to be thinking of ways that you could help this be a win-win for developers and for the city. Because, we're going to have a huge population explosion for young people coming from Pine Ridge. We're just going to have overwhelming needs. We already have overwhelming needs. And we know that other communities have these requirements, different requirements, and for TIFs and different things and for incentives. And so if you could be thinking of ways that are situations where this would work or not work or whatever, could bring that, let us know. That would be helpful. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Hager, are you comfortable with thinking, sir? All right, any further discussion? The motion is moved to council without recommendation. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. On to item number 19. Ronna Graham, City. Sorry. Yeah, we'll do public comment first about that. I'm going to open public comment on items numbers 19 through 24, excuse me. And we only have one speaker request form for items number 19 through 24, and that is for Mr. Aaron Johnson, item number 23. Sir, if you'd approach the microphone, you have 3 minutes.
Aaron Johnson, Shotgun Willie's. I just wanted to be here to, if you guys had any questions or anything, I'll just kind of hold my comments for a later date. Thank you,
sir. Anybody else wish to speak on any of the items numbers 19 through 24? None appearing. I'm going to close public comment, and now move on to number 19. Item number 19 is Ronna Graham, city roofing permit process and inspection concerns. I guess Chair will recognize Ronna Graham.
Hi. I'm just
Good.
returning.
Actually, excuse me a second, ma'am. Procedurally, I should have had you speak during public comment, but Charity, would you like to have the floor?
Procedurally, actually, she has an item on the agenda, so this
Okay.
timing would be
Oh,
appropriate.
she actually, okay, she put the item on the agenda?
Yes.
Apologize.
I was just
Go
going
ahead,
to
ma'am.
say
Sorry.
that it has been recommended to continue your item for a couple of weeks in order for just so you know, I know that somebody's contacted you at this point, but I just wanted on the record to continue the item for 2 weeks until you have had an opportunity, as well as our city attorney has had the opportunity to review this final report before it becomes public. So just so that you're aware that that's probably the motion that would be made today.
Yes,
Thank
and
you.
I was made aware of it at very short notice, and I think that's one of my points that I tried to make in the last meeting was the professionalism of the city itself, and contacting me at 10 to 10 this morning and informing me of that was not the best thing. They could have informed me of it when they knew themselves. I have some concerns about how the investigation went. I was made to feel like the investigation was based solely on the contractor themselves. When I approached the city 6 weeks ago, it was to ask you to look into the fact of the planning department and how they actually work and how they don't issue appropriate planning permits. And in the interview that I had, it was all about the contractor. I was asked, what the city inspectors had said, but the way it came across to me is they were not interested at all. So I do have concerns about how this investigation took place, and my concern is now that I have to drag this on for another 2 weeks to actually have this resolved, when this is causing a lot of health conditions, a lot of stress. And again, I still have a lien on me. I've hired an attorney to, to see if he can get the lien removed. He was hoping that he would have a better idea of what was taking place today before he actually started proceedings. And now I'm back to square one, waiting.
Okay, ma'am. Is there any, council members, any questions? I do not have a motion on the floor. Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson.
Thank you. I'd make a motion to continue for 2 weeks, and also that the investigation, I don't know what exactly been, but I did want the planning department issues looked at. They may have been, but anyway, if I can get a second.
Second for discussion.
We have a second
Okay.
by Laurenti, motion by Peterson.
Okay. Because part of the things that you brought forward were concerning about what was happening in the planning department. And I do apologize that you were notified this morning, and sometimes that's what happens. We meet on Monday mornings for agenda review, and decisions are made, and you're right, it's not very professional when it involves our citizens, so we need to look at that also. Okay, thank you.
Chair recognizes Joel Landine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, let me apologize. We had discussed it on Monday, and Ms. Graham should have been notified on Monday. The report was completed yesterday. I still need to review it. I do appreciate you continuing it for 2 weeks, because I believe that Mr. Limbaugh also needs to review it, and Ms. Graham, and we'll provide that to her as soon as we can, not just prior to the meeting, so she'll have a chance to review it, and hopefully that'll allay some of her concerns. I will say that it did cover all of her concerns. It was not solely focused on the contractor. It was focused on the process, and I think that's really and how the employees interacted. So that was included in it, and hopefully she'll see that when she reviews the report, and we'll get that to her hopefully by end of this week, beginning of next week, depending on if any revisions are needed after I reviewed it and taken a look at it. So I apologize that she wasn't notified on Monday. That was really our fault. So
Any further discussion? Motion is to continue for 2 weeks, to the Legal and Finance Committee, which would be, May 28th, 2014. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Item number 20 is Stephen Gowan, request for reimbursement for abatement in the sum of $72 at 134 Anamosa Street. And I do believe Mr. Gowan is unable to attend today, and so I would entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion approved by Laurenti. Do I have a second? Second by Charity Doyle, and Chair recognizes. Okay.
To give it to him.
Okay, so Charity Doyle, Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson.
Thank you. I make a substitute motion that we give back the $42 and that he pay for the $30 that was out of pocket for the city. If I can get a second, I will speak more.
Second for discussion.
We have a second for discussion on a substitute motion to refund an amount of $42.
Okay. One thing, I guess I'm unclear as to why the city wasn't called to say once they received the notice, why the city wasn't called to say, you know, I'm having this problem, can you put it off? It could be that he was in the hospital and nobody was getting his mail. I don't know all the details, but I would like to know. And the other issue is that we need to be consistent. We could have a lot of people saying they didn't get their mail and for different reasons. So I feel it's more than fair that we allow him for us to eat our cost on it, but not to have to pay for his actual shoveling. So for what it's worth, thank you.
Chair recognizes Alderwoman Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not actually basing it on the fact that he had knee surgery and wasn't able to shovel the sidewalks himself. I'm basing it on the fact that the roads are completely clear. The pictures show that someone rode a bike through there. It went all the way down to the concrete. There's not even a half inch of snow. It was not that big of a factor. I can see if we're talking inches of snow impeding pedestrian, but that's not the case. There's been plenty of issues. I think this was somebody just had a fit, probably didn't like walking in the cold that day, called, whatever, and it was done. And I think $30 to go shovel this small stretch of sidewalk is probably a little ridiculous, so I'm still for the original motion.
Okay, the motion on the floor is currently to refund $42 administrative fee, and I have no further discussion on that item. Anybody wish to say anything more about that item? Motion is $42. All in favor, say aye. A no?
No.
Motion's defeated, 2-1. Back to the original motion. Original motion is to approve, is that correct? Yes. Original motion is to approve the $72 reimbursement. Any further discussion on that motion? All in favor say aye.
No.
Motion carries 2-1. Moving on to item number 21. Is introduction and first reading of ordinance 5987 and regarding supplemental appropriation number 2 for 2014. A motion approved by Laurenti, second by Peterson. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Motion carries. Item number 22, second reading and recommendation of ordinance 5991 to amend chapter 17.16 of the Rapid City Municipal Code to allow a pet store as a conditional use in a central business district. Motion approved by Laurenti, second by Doyle. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Item number 23, second reading and recommendation of ordinance 5993 to require certain adult-oriented businesses to provide an unobstructed view in patron-permitted areas, define knowledge as pertains to the licensees, and to delineate the hearing process for adverse action against licensees in the city of Rapid City by amending chapter 5.70 of the Rapid City Municipal Code. Motion approved by Laurenti, second by Peterson. The chair recognizes Charity Doyle.
Mr. Chair, a question for Mr. Johnson, if I may.
Mr. Johnson, if you please approach the microphone, sir.
Since you came all this way, I figured we had to ask you at least one question. I know you had made a comment to us about having been willing to install cameras in the little stall in lieu of removing the door. My question for you is, was that something that you tried to get worked out with the police department as we were going through this process, or is that something you thought of after the fact and want to be considered?
No, I have a camera that partially shoots into that room right now, and there was nothing said about it. You know, there was nothing ever brought up to it because the door did obstruct the view partially. And there was some stuff about in the ordinance, I'm not real certain word for word what it said, but there was something, you know, electronic devices added to the room that would also, the way I interpreted it, that would suffice also without taking the door off. And I'm kind of familiar with that with the state also, is because the same way with my video lottery, I have to have a camera in that room if there's nobody specifically has eyes on the video lottery machines. So I thought maybe that, you know, if that would apply also to that, you know, a camera in the room, so where that there's be a monitor that could be viewed by staff, that
Okay.
would suffice for that.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Landine, would it be possible, or I guess prudent, to have Mr. Johnson discuss this further with you or the appropriate party prior to Monday night, if possible?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, Mr. Johnson did bring it up to me. I said I would have Allison look into it because what I informed him is I don't want to treat you more strictly than anyone else, but I don't want to treat you more leniently than anyone else either. Allison looked at it and informed me that a camera would not work in a private room under the current ordinance. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't allow that as an alternative. I don't think that's something necessarily for us to discuss with Mr. Johnson at this point. If it's something the council's interested, then you could direct us to say, rather than just say there can't be a door, we would consider allowing a door if there was a camera that was visible, and then we could take that, work with Mr. Johnson and whoever else, and come back with a proposal for allowing cameras in lieu of just saying there's no doors or obstructed views.
Okay, thank you. One more question for Mr. Johnson, if I may.
Please.
Thank you. I think I've shared with you my reasons for supporting this are a little bit different than the traditional reasons that you hear. My question for you is, have you ever had an occurrence, or one of your girls had an occurrence within this private area where they were put in harm's way, where the patron they were with was not acting like a gentleman, which put them in danger, put them at risk?
Physical danger? No. I mean, there's been comments made in there, but nothing, like where the patron would want, to do more or see more. And it's at the dancer's discretion that if anything comes up that they don't feel comfortable with, and that's why there's no locks on the doors, they can immediately just step back and they're out. They're through the door. Because the way it's set up in that dance area is the patron has to sit with their back to the wall, where they can't trap or pin any dancer in the deal. So if there is ever a moment where they feel uncomfortable, and we've discussed that with all the dancers, is that you walk away. The dance is over, done. Everything's left up to the dancer's discretion as far as if they feel like there's anything that they're in trouble with or the customer does inappropriately, then they have the right to end the dance.
Okay, I appreciate your response to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair will recognize Alderman Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm glad that Alderwoman Doyle brought that up. But as I'm thinking about that, it's something for us to think about it before the next council meeting. First things that come to mind for me is the increased duty, if you will, on enforcement. If they're allowed to have a piece of technology like a camera in there, then how does an undercover officer get to see the monitor that shows that particular camera? Do they have to request to see it? Where is the monitor going to be replaced? Where is it going to be placed? Kind of blows their undercover situation if they've got to go ask, depending on where the monitor is. And the other side is when the technology is down and not working, we're back to the square one. So just something for us to think about as we move forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laurenti, and Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson. Bonnie?
I appreciate that viewpoint also. I think the little room is going to be covered to two walls, and so it will provide some element of privacy for the clients. So right now, I don't think I would be supporting the camera option. So thank you.
Okay, I have no further lights. Anybody else wish to speak on this item? Motion is to approve. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Item number 24, authorize the mayor and finance officer to sign settlement agreement between City of Rapid City and Highmark, Inc. And Chair recognizes Joel Landine, City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize there isn't an agreement linked. I've outlined to the council basically what the settlement is. I would still ask you to continue this to council without recommendation. I've been in contact with the attorney for Highmark. We're just negotiating some of the specific language. He was not able to get me a draft back prior to the meeting. I'd actually hoped to have it for the meeting and pass out here. I will get it to the council and linked as soon as possible, but we'd still like to try to get this approved Monday night if we can, because we need to. I'm not sure if the work's going to get done right away, but we're trying to. He has other projects lined up, and we want as much time and flexibility as possible to try to get this scheduled for both the city and for the contractor to get this done.
Thank you, Ms. Lundeen. Chair will recognize Mr. Laurenti.
I make a motion to move this to council without recommendation.
Motion by Laurenti, second by Doyle. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. And now I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion adjourned. We are hereby adjourned.